right,
Yeah,
so,
I gotta do this. I gotta do this.
welcome everybody. This feels kind of comfortable,
Yeah.
but weird at the same time.
Oh, you think it's weird for you. It really, it's very clear. It's like I'm sitting there. This is so weird.
Oh, wow. Oh, good. Well,
Yeah.
that's what we were aiming for.
Yeah, it's almost like you're sitting here for us as well, because we could just look over and see you and talk to you.
Wow.
The microphone is picking up everybody around the room.
Yes, I'm able to hear everybody very clearly.
Good.
You're
Alright.
sitting right in front of the
Now
windows.
let's do a wave. Kathy, you.
Woo!
All right. Claire, you have to do the wave.
All right.
Hi.
How you doing?
Well, good morning.
Doing well.
Welcome. So we are, I was just saying this feels quite comfortable, but also weird at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Because we have.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to figure out why it's weird.
Tennessee.
Well, I've been on Zoom for 2.5 years.
Yeah, that's true.
So, and if the numbers go back up, I will be back on Zoom. And when it's my turn to teach, I'll be teaching from Zoom. But anyhow,
How's your mother doing, by the way?
better, got some medication adjustment and that has helped tremendously. Got her hearing aids finally so that she can hear.
Cool. That makes such a big difference.
It
Wait, does
is
it
there, right?
So anyhow, so that's why I'm so careful, because if she gets COVID,
I don't blame you.
that is not
At
going to
all.
be good. So it's highly likely it will not be good.
Yeah.
So anyhow, so I continue to be careful. All right, so I'm going to close the door just like we always do. All right, so as Susan and Sarah and I were planning, for this year for Sunday school, one of the things we talked about doing was the Psalms. And what we decided to do instead is to start our class in a little bit different way each week, and that's with a psalm. And so that's going to be our new tradition. And so we're going to use this book, Prayers to the God of My Life, Psalms for the Morning and Evening. So we'll be reading a part of the psalm to open the class. And then
Hey, Stuart.
and there's Stuart. Hey, Stuart.
Hey,
Welcome. We're just getting started.
good. I was having a little trouble with my iPad. It didn't want to cooperate.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Thank you. Hi, Claire.
All right, so here is our psalm. This is from Psalm 49. Hear this, all you peoples. Hearken, all you who dwell in the world. You of high degree and low, rich and poor together. My mouth shall speak of wisdom, and my heart shall meditate on understanding. Let us pray. Lord, we are grateful for this day and for this psalm to remind us that you are the God of all people. Open our minds and hearts to learn your word. Amen. Okay, so I know those of you on Zoom, it might be a little hard to see, but I resisted wiping off the board from 2.5 years ago. So this is our capsule of time. So in fact, this even goes back. So we were in the middle of a Church World Service kit collection, and our class ended up collecting 40 kits. In that 2020 period of time, which was just fantastic. We were going to have a Seder dinner on April the 10th of 2020. So we'll have to keep that in mind.
I did order the plate and it came in. I have it.
All right, because
It's still in its box.
It's still in its box.
yeah.
Ready to spring into action at a moment's notice.
So what were we studying? We got to try to remember why we got into talking about
Jewish, just.
we were to something Jewish. Oh yeah, we did All right, and I guess at some point at that time we had done the book Surprised by Hope by N.T. Wright. What are we waiting for? And what are we going to do about it in the meantime? And so we've been waiting for 2.5 years to come back together. And so here we
Well,
are.
we've been together all along
Well, we have.
on Zoom.
We have had quite a community, and we still do on Zoom. So that's why we have maintained the hybrid model. So speaking of that, you know, like I was saying earlier, if the numbers go really back up, I will probably go back on Zoom and teach from Zoom. So anyhow, so we have that flexibility, and so. All right. So as Susan and Sarah and I, and you guys chime in on this, got to talking about what we might do this year. There are some books of the New Testament that we haven't done. And so I don't remember how it came up. I think you came across it.
Right, I was just looking through the Bible because I'd had I'd had a dinner with Gail and Harold, and we were just talking about, you know, they said, what are you gonna study next? And I said, well, I was looking through the Bible at all of the different New Testament chapters that we had studied. And there were some that we hadn't even touched on. And when I was reading about those particular chapters in the Bible, they labeled them as the Catholic epistles or the Catholic letters. And that was like John and Peter, First and Second Peter, and First, Second, Third John, and Jude, and those letters. And they were, some of them are like 1 page long.
Yeah.
Not even,
Like,
You know,
yeah. But it's Catholic with a little c.
yes.
That meant for the church.
It
You know,
meant
there's
for
right.
letters for the
Universal.
church universal,
Yeah.
right,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
So that's what we were thinking about maybe going to after we get through all of those extra books, then we would probably start our rotation back again with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and blah, 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 you know, because some people in the class, I think you, Stuart, had mentioned that you weren't a part of those studies. when we were
Right.
studying the
Mhm.
other Gospels. You started up with Matthew, I believe.
Right, I did.
Matthew. And so it's been how many years since we studied? It's been a year studying John.
Well,
Year and a half.
took us 17 months, and none of us remembers when that was.
Well, Paul Semrel was still here.
Paul Simmerl was still here,
And
we
he's
were
been
still
gone
in
for over
the,
10 years.
right, we were still in the fellowship hall. And we finally had figured out that if we met under the overhang,
Yeah.
we could hear each other better. Fond memories.
And welcome Gail and Harold. Nice
Yes.
to see you there.
I was
Or
just
not
sending
see
you
you.
a text message to tell you we're here. I won't do.
Oh, all right.
Can you hear us, Gail
Or Harold.
or Harold?
Yeah. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
okay.
All right,
Yeah.
good, good, good.
Good to not see you.
And there shouldn't be any reflection on the TV because we've got it positioned in another location, so.
You
let us
guys
know how
look,
that-
you guys look perfect.
Okay,
Great.
all right.
We like
Rick and
perfect.
Bates is over here on the other side, so.
Can't see me, but that's okay. I can't see you.
All right, so that's how we came to start off doing these books and that are referred to as the Catholic letters. Or as my Bible terms them, the letters to all Christians is how it's titled in my Bible, which is what's called the New Jerusalem Bible translation. All right, so in getting into talking about those, I want to sort of back up. You know, context tells us a lot, which is one of the themes for this group. So I want to go back to just a little refresher as far as the letters that were written by Paul. All right. And we've talked before about not all the letters that are attributed to Paul were written by Paul. So through tremendous amount of study over a tremendous amount of time, a lot of scholars have come down to the 7 that they think were actually written by Paul. All right. And so does anybody remember what those are?
No, I can do the other 6. I can't do the 7.
We'll subtract the 6 you know from the others.
Is it Ephesians? No,
That's
a
no,
question.
Ephesians. Yeah, that's a question one. All right.
No, I figured.
All right, so the earliest, and this is the first letter written by Paul, so it's really the oldest book in the New Testament, is First Thessalonians. All right, that was the first letter that we have that Paul wrote, and then Galatians, and then First Corinthians. All right, and it's thought that those three were written 48 to 50 CE. All right, so those are the oldest books of the New Testament, with First Thessalonians thought to be first. Then written in the mid-50s, all right, so about 53, 55, so 58, somewhere in there, is Second Corinthians, Philemon, which is one page, and Philippians. And then the last letter that we have that Paul wrote is Romans. And it's pretty commonly thought that Romans was written about 58. So Paul's letters in that roughly a 10-year span of about 4850 to 58 as far as Paul's letters. All right, so putting that in the context of the Gospels, all right, the resource I was looking at last night had Mark being, we all know Mark was the first one written. That was at about 65 to 73. Then Matthew and Luke were written about 80 to 90 CE. Then John, about 90 to 110. All right. And then the book of Acts, also written in about that 80 to 90 time frame.
Because Acts is just Luke part 2.
Yes, Luke part 2. And some of the reading that I did for today, one of the things I learned is, and I don't remember this from when we studied Acts, that there are passages of Acts, parts of Acts that are thought to have been letters that were written, and then it just all got pulled together, how things get pulled together. So, yeah, I hadn't.
Yeah, that wasn't part of our book.
No, it wasn't part of our book. So, and, so that was over, and those were over a period of time. So this is not an exact science, the dating of these books. There's no carbon dating. We have no material to do carbon dating or anything like that. So there are some objective things that, as far as statements in the books that help folks date these books. Some of it is the grammar, some cultural references, stuff like that. So it's not an exact science. All right, so then these Catholic letters, all right, are a couple of them are some of the newest or the last written books that are in the Bible. All right, and we know there were other books written during that time, other letters and writings that were used in the churches but are not part of the Bible. All right, and so some of those writings are used to help date some of the books in the Bible. So they were used by some of the early churches. And there was, that first couple of centuries up till the 4th century, the 300s, right? That's when the canon, what's called the canon, or the books that are in the Bible, that's when it was pretty much established. So, so up until that point, different areas.
Are those other letters part of the Apocrypha, or are they available, or have they been lost?
Some have been lost, some there's just fragments of.
Like Judas, wasn't there?
Yeah,
There's a
yeah, and there's
Judas.
well, the Gospel of Thomas was written much later. It was like what, well into the 200s or even 300.
If it's still existing, I've got a couple of books at home that would have it. I'll try to remember to bring it next week.
Okay, all right,
I have a question. I'm confused. I don't think my coffee's kicked in this morning.
that's all right.
You talked about the 7 that we knew Paul wrote,
Yes,
and then you talked about the Catholic. Are we,
Yeah,
is
that's
that
a-
the 2 separate batches? that we're
Yes.
talking- Okay.
yes, yes.
Because I thought you
Okay.
were saying how early Paul's were.
Yeah, because
and
we
then you were
had-
saying the Catholic ones were the latter ones.
Yeah,
All right,
we had
so-
studied the letters of Paul
Okay.
at one point, and then we also studied a book.
Yeah, we did the first
First
Paul
one.
by
Right.
Borg and Crossan, was that his name? That was, we learned a lot out of that book, if you haven't read it, the first Paul. He really walked through all this stuff. All right, so the other books that are attributed to Paul, okay? Second Thessalonians, okay? First and Second Timothy, Titus, Colossians, and Ephesians.
So when you say attributed, does that mean everybody thinks he wrote them, but he really didn't?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah, and
they're written as though
yeah,
It was
Paul
from
wrote
Paul.
them.
yeah.
Gotcha.
And
And
I'm
they're
gonna talk
really in
more
two,
about that
two
practice.
categories. The Colossians, Ephesians, and Second
Thessalonians,
Thessalonians, they think he didn't write, but there's not an agreement. And then the Titus and First and Second Timothy scholars are 99.9% sure that there's no way he wrote them.
yeah, First and Second Timothy, this resource I was looking at yesterday, because Paul died, what, in like 65, 78? So First and Second Timothy, this resource thought they were written about 100 to 110. So clearly that was, unless Paul was like Methuselah. No.
Who knows?
All right, who knows? For Second Thessalonians
How long
was
did-
100.
how old was Noah?
Colossians was in the 80s and Ephesians was in the 90s. So all of the, by this dating process, all of those books would have been outside of Paul's lifespan.
But Hebrews was also attributed to Paul.
Right, and that was written 80 to 90. Most folks, yeah, at some point, folks attribute it to Paul, but, right, so here's why that happens. And this affects these Catholic letters also, all right? It was a common practice at that time to write letters as though you were a well-known person. That was a common practice in those days. To say, to write,
Ghostwriting.
hi, I'm Paul, greetings to all of you in, Asia Minor or whatever. But you weren't really Paul. And so, in our days and times, that would have been, that would be
A ghostwriter.
a
Fraud.
fraud,
You know,
Fraud is what I thought.
And
Well, you have a lot of
interesting-
people,
Identity
famous
theft.
people writing, their books are written by
Yes,
somebody
but
else.
yes,
yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
An interesting other perspective of that is if that was sort of a form of meditation, and I know about Paul, and I try to think through Paul's line of thinking, then that is different than just saying I'm writing a letter and I'm saying Paul wrote it.
Uh-huh.
But then sometimes a person, we're human, and sometimes a person has their own thoughts about what Paul should have said.
Right.
And we learn that in some of the letters that we
Yeah.
don't think were Paul because they just didn't make sense with what Paul said over here and over here. And now he says this, and it's completely a different philosophy than what Paul
Yeah,
normally
help me out, 'cause
projects.
Paul was revolutionary,
Yes,
and then another batch was reactionary.
yes.
And another, what was the third one?
Conservative.
Consolatory. Consolatory, wasn't it?
Conciliatory.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
just looked at the book.
conciliatory, I think may have come, was that the last one?
Yeah.
Because they were trying to put the women, shut the women back up.
Yes.
Right.
Right, because that's one of the things we learned when we did Paul, was even within these letters that are known to be written by Paul, there were things that got added in.
Right.
That they, particularly about women, a couple of passages that are in these letters that are very different than what Paul says in other parts. So anyhow,
The concept of substitution was something Paul did not believe in yet, and yet showed up in later letters.
uh-huh, yep, yep.
Substitution.
All
Yeah.
right, so expand on what you mean, what you're talking about, Harold.
Well, Paul talked about, I don't know if you guys can hear me okay or not. Paul talked about, okay, good. Paul talked about, the cross and Christ dying on the cross and what it meant, but he never talked in the concept that Christ was taking on our sins, substituting us for the concept of taking all of our sins with him. And that's a concept that developed later. And the original letters of Paul, you won't find that in, but the later letters you do. If that explains it at all.
Uh-huh. Thank you. Yep. Yep. So, and I've said that before, I struggle with that concept in my own faith journey. So,
Well, I've read, and language changes over time. But several years ago, I read that the idea of the substitution of Jesus for us actually can be dated back to about the year 1000.
it's that recent,
Yeah, but they use those words. It just didn't mean at that time what we take it to mean now.
right? Right. Yeah, because language changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can understand why it might happen because, someone like Paul, who these people who are writing in his place must have thought he is a trusted name. And so if I say something in his words and people think that it's him, they're going to believe what I think now,
Mhm.
or it's going to give my ideas more credibility.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it does. So, okay, so, all right, so going back to dating the books, this is another concept that I learned, that in looking at the books and how, what order to put them in as far as when they were written, they can write them in there. What we have in the Bible is the canonical order, the order that they're in the Bible. All right. And I don't know why they're in that order.
It was probably.
I mean, I'm sure there's next.
Committee thing.
Yeah, it was. Right, yeah, it was. It was a committee thing and in.
It was Nicene Conference of 324.
Yeah,
That's
I was
the
gonna say in
committee.
the 300s.
Yeah, that's the committee.
Yeah, I used to know all that stuff and it's back in there in a file cabinet.
Yeah, me
very
too.
back, and
But that article that Kathy, that you were reading, it was saying that they think that it does make sense that that the order that things were put in the New Testament kind of followed the order
Oh,
that they
yes.
were in the Old Testament.
Yes.
Where first you have the major books,
with the
you
with the
know,
stories of
the major stories,
the major
and it's
characters.
followed up by letters and
Yeah, and
whatever.
other side things that happen.
And
but-
we're best to put Revelations then at the very end,
Right. Right, yeah, because the Old Testament starts with the Torah, the 5 books. And then the New Testament starts with the 4 Gospels. So, yeah, so there's that rough order, but yeah, but why Matthew was first, I've forgotten.
Well,
why
because
that
they
is.
literally thought Matthew had
Because
been written first.
It's Matthew,
then-
Mark, Luke, and John.
Oh,
Sounds
because
a lot better
Matthew
than
has
Mark,
the big
Matthew, and
genealogy
John.
of
Right, and they thought that Mark had taken Matthew and condensed it.
Well, and it was the exact opposite with more study and stuff. Because remember, we write a letter today, we're taught you have to put the date on it. Nobody put a date on anything.
Nobody writes letters anymore.
Well,
There's a timestamp.
I don't want to sidetrack us too far, but this is interesting to me, just in terms of believability. So you say this letter was written by Paul, but it really wasn't.
yeah,
So I got a text message a couple days ago from Cindy Stratton asking me to buy some stuff, and I did, and I got scammed. But the point of this is, I thought it
Cindy's
came from
name.
Cindy Stratton, and that's a powerful name,
Identity theft.
and I thought it was real.
so it's
So
still
I don't want
happening.
to take us off on another thing, but
But,
it's just that
hopefully these weren't
believability.
scams, but yeah, yeah. Because, all right. All right, so there's the canonical order, there's the chronological order that they were written in, all right? and that's based on events that they refer to. And then there's the compositional order, which has to do with more like how they were written and stuff. So I can't say enough, remember enough about the compositional order. Last night I could, but this morning I can't. So sorry about that. So, all right. So moving to these Catholic letters. All right. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those. The first one is James, the book of James. All right. Then 1st and 2nd Peter, which were not written by Peter. All right. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and they're not real sure who the John is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Jude. Okay. And these 7 books were written anywhere from 60 CE to 110. So that's and there's some, like one of them, Jude, some folks think it was written in the 90s. Some folks think it was written somewhere between 60 to 110, which is a pretty broad, The book of James is thought generally to have been written 70 to 80. 1st and 2nd Peter. 1st Peter around 100 CE. 2nd Peter somewhere between 110 to 150. So it's the oldest. I mean the newest, I guess the last written.
Most recent.
The most recent written. So that's a pretty broad range. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John were written 90 to 100. And then, like I said, Jude in the 90s or 60 to 110. So a pretty broad range. All right. So as I was preparing for today, I decided we're going to start with Peter. I decided to start.
Did you randomly draw that out of the bowl last night?
I didn't want to delve into James.
No.
We're going to go back and do James. So our plan is to do the 7 Catholic letters, these 7 letters to all Christians, as it's titled in my Bible. So, all right. So if folks will grab a Bible, all right, because we're going to do some looking at stuff to help us with the context.
Do you want to mention about the book that we're using for?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So if anybody's interested, we've used this book over the years, the People's Commentary, the People's New Testament Commentary. And this came out a number of years ago. It was written by, well, I've had my copy since 2005. Okay. So,
Thank you.
and Fred Craddock, we know was a disciple minister, a well-known disciple minister. So this is the one that we're using. Because if we had to buy Barclay or any of the other commentaries, we'd be buying like 5 or 6 of them. Yeah. And all 3 of us already had this one, so this is what we're using. Okay, so we're going to talk first about Peter himself, all right? Because these 2 books were written as though the author was Peter, all right? So we want to know a little bit about Peter. All right, so if somebody would look up Matthew 16, 17, and if somebody else would look up John 1:42.
I'll do that one.
Okay,
Okay, I've got Matthew.
all right. Who wants to do John 21:15? Okay,
What was my John reference, the first one?
1:42.
Okay, what was Matthew?
Matthew 16, 17. And these are the verses that tell us about Peter's father.
Was Peter literate?
Who knows?
He was a fisherman.
All right, so I'm going to get to
What was the one
that.
you wanted?
It's a logical question.
Peter, what was one?
You are
Third one,
John,
oh, John.
John 21:15. Okay. So first of all, remember Peter's original name was
Simon.
Simon, which is the Greek version of it. And I learned this, Simeon is the Hebrew version. All right. And then Cephas. Oh, we'll get to Cephas. Sorry.
I have
Erase
Cephas
that. You have Cephas?
in here. in my-
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's the Aramaic for Peter. All right. So, right, so Sarah, so these verses are telling us who Simon's father was. All right, so Sarah, Matthew 16:17.
Jesus told him, Simon, son of Jonah, you are blessed. You didn't discover this on your own. It was shown to you by my Father in heaven.
Okay, and then John 1:42.
That's me. He brought Simon to Jesus, who looked at him and said, "You, Simon, son of John, you shall be called Cephas," that is Peter the rock.
Okay, all right, and then 21:15, John 21:15.
When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?
Okay, so,
And it goes on. a bit.
all right, so Jonah and John apparently Jonah is the Greek and John is the Hebrew. I don't know, but anyhow, Jonah and John are
Same
used.
person.
Yeah, apparently so. All right, so that's all we know about Peter's genealogy. All right. That it's thought that he was born between 10 BC and 10 CE, somewhere in that 20-year range. So he could have been 10 years older than Jesus, 10 years younger than Jesus, same age as Jesus, somewhere in that range. Perhaps in Bethsaida, all right. He probably grew up speaking Aramaic, but also knowing some Greek. How literate he was, we don't know.
What was required back then for a boy to be trained in the Torah? I mean, did only certain boys get trained, or I thought everybody had to learn the Torah when you were a Jewish boy?
Do you know, Harold?
I thought, yeah, I think everybody.
And if you had to learn that, I would think you would have to
Learn
learn to
Hebrew.
read,
Learn the Hebrew.
or it's verbal.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And he
Hebrew.
certainly knew some math because he sold fish. So he could count well and keep records and that type thing.
All right, so that leads into the point that as a fisherman, he would have been what would have been considered sort of middle class at that time, because the tax collectors and their income, they were upper class. Fishermen, because they had to count and there was some trade involved, that kind of stuff, they were considered sort of middle class, so to speak, for that day and time. And then the lower class would have been like the day laborers, that kind of stuff.
But now Peter owned his own boats. That would have put him at least upper middle class.
Yeah, he and his brother Andrew.
Owned
When
the
his brother
boats.
Andrew. Yeah.
Right.
Right, so they were fishermen together in the Sea of Galilee. So one of the points about these books, 1st and 2nd Peter, going back to the Greek, they are written in some of the most sophisticated Greek in the New Testament. So it's suggesting that they were written by a well-educated person. Okay, and so it's thought that Peter would not necessarily have been that well educated. So that's one of the arguments that Peter didn't write these 2 letters. All right. All right. Anybody remember if Peter was married?
No idea. I would assume so. Just given the culture of the day, but
All right. So if somebody look up Mark 1. So Nancy, would you do Mark 1, 30 to 31? And Joe, would you look up 1 Corinthians
Yeah, because his mother got lowered down through the roof.
His
His
mother-in-law.
mother, not his
First
wife.
Corinthians chapter 9, verse 5.
Okay, what were the verses?
Mark 1,
Got one.
30 through 31.
Now Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever, and immediately they told him of her. And he came up and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her, and she served them.
Okay.
Mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And she served them. I love that. I healed her so she could serve.
Yeah. Okay, and then the First Corinthians.
Do we not have the right to be accompanied by a believing wife, as do the other apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas?
Okay, Cephas meaning Peter. All right. So his wife apparently went with him on some of his mission trips. All right. So that's kind of the background for Peter's life. All right. And then he becomes a disciple for Jesus, and his life is totally reoriented. You know, he lives this sort of nomadic lifestyle, you know, where they're traveling around.
He did come from a very sophisticated city. I mean, that would have influenced Peter quite a bit also.
Oh, okay, Bethsaida was, or Capernaum?
Yeah, that was a central trade route, which is why he probably spoke Greek pretty well. There was a village, I think, of about 1,800 Jewish families, but it was right in the middle of a lot of trade. So he probably saw a lot more, and he was a little more sophisticated than, say, coming from Nazareth.
Gotcha. He would have been exposed to more travelers and stuff. Yeah, okay, cool. All right. So what else would you say we know about Peter? How would, from what you recall of him in the Gospels and the book of Acts?
Everything's supposed to be built on him. He's the rock, right?
Impetuous.
Yeah, he was a man's man.
All right,
Deny Jesus.
yeah, he did. All right, what about the book of Acts?
Oh, that dream.
Uh-huh.
That
Because what was Peter?
Peter was a very staunch Jew. You followed all of the rules. If you wanted to be a Christian, you had to be a Jew first. You had to keep kosher. And he had the dream with the animals coming down and on a sheet. And God said, you can eat anything here. It's what comes out of your mouth that makes you.
And it was strange because I had thought that he was the one that was kind of fighting with Paul about the Gentiles and whether the Gentiles should or should not. And when I read something here online, it says, First Peter is a powerful letter written to persecuted Gentile Christians, reminding them that they are chosen by God and have a future hope in Jesus.
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah. Well, and we'll get to who was doing the persecution, because it may not be who you think.
Okay.
All right. I'll be hanging on that one. All right. So Jesus, Peter being impetuous, he also was a leader. All right.
So speaks before he thinks.
Yeah. So we think, all right, so could those things.
Maybe that's what Harold meant by a man's man.
That's exactly what I meant.
All right, so could those characteristics that we attribute to Peter, could those have been for literary effect? What now?
Repeat that.
Could those characteristics of Peter's personality have been included in the Gospels for literary effect?
I can see it as giving him authority, because he was the emissary to the Jews for Christianity.
He became that, yeah.
Yes, but
Sometimes
he
I
needs
think-
authority which base that on.
Sometimes
So
I
could
always think
see
that
building
Peter,
him up.
Uh-huh.
sometimes I always think that Peter is the voice of us. Okay, because he's always spitting out things that we would be thinking in our heads at the same time.
True.
You know, yes, I believe in you. No, I would never persecute you. You know, it's, you know, those kinds of immediate human, very human reactions to what Jesus is doing or whatever. That, so I can see how it might be. He might be the character that's bringing what's in our heads, you know, or at least the people who are reading this in his time.
Mhm.
Or could be that's the person that God chose.
Well, go back to the Old Testament. How flawed, look at the flaws of David. You know? Other folks in the Old Testament, there were a tremendous number of leaders in the Old Testament that were not perfect people.
Yeah.
And it's like, why did God choose
That,
these people?
that gives you some of the.
You know, Moses had a stutter and he
And
questioned
Jonah
God.
ran the other way.
Yeah,
It gives you some of the belief of, it makes you believe what's happening more because they're as flawed as you are, as we are. You know, that why would you write this Bible and have these flawed characters in it? You know?
all right. All right, so as far as Peter's role in the New Testament and understanding Jesus, okay? In all four Gospels, Peter made some sort of confession of Jesus as uniquely sent from God. And I want us to hear these four statements, okay? So Sarah, Mark 8:29. Ruth Ann, you want to do Luke 9:20? Bud, Matthew 16:16. You haven't read one today. Susan, John 6:69. Does everybody have them?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Luke 9:20. Nancy, Matthew. No,
I'm Mark.
you're Mark. You're Luke. Who has Matthew 16:16?
I do.
Okay, and then Susan is John 6:69. Okay. Ready? Okay.
Okay.
So these are in each of the Gospels, Peter's confession of Jesus as uniquely sent from God.
Then Jesus asked them, "But who do you say I am?" "You are the Messiah," Peter replied.
Luke,
And you, he said, who do you say I am? Peter answered, God's Messiah.
Matthew,
Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God."
and John.
We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God.
So while Peter was the person that made these declarations in the gospel, when you go then to when he denied Jesus, and there were other times during that time, you know, what Jesus told him at one time, back off, Satan, you know, that Peter's understanding of Jesus was incomplete during his lifetime. You know, we've talked many times as we've gone through the Gospels that this was totally new concept. You know, we've got 2,000 years of experience to understand this. They had a year or 3 years, depending on.
And his faith was still developing too. When he gets out of the boat and starts walking toward Jesus, if he starts out gangbusters and then gets halfway there and it's like, oh crap.
I'm walking on water.
Yeah.
What
So he
was
was a
I
work in
thinking?
progress.
Yes, he was, as we are.
Yeah.
As we are. Okay, so let's talk about the word Peter, because I just realized what time it is. All right, so the word Peter means what?
Rock.
Rock. Right, that's what the word means in Greek. All right, that Greek word Petros meant rock. At that time in first century Judaism, that was not a name for anybody. They have never found anything where anybody else at that time was named Peter. All right.
Well, just think about that though. I mean, you know, you piss people off saying you're dumber than a rock.
So Peter in Greek, Cephas in Aramaic, all right? So put that in the tradition of the Old Testament name changes. Jacob to Israel, Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah, Simon to Peter. All right. Okay, so then in Acts, we know that there was this ongoing, you know, whether to become a Christian, you had to do all the Jewish rituals or not, right? And so that was Peter and Paul, and they came together at the Jerusalem Council in AD 50, about 50. It's pretty much of a consensus that was in AD 50. It's thought that Peter went on mission trips, you know, during that time, as referred to in 1 Corinthians. But the list of places mentioned in 1 Corinthians is not the list of places that are mentioned in 1 Peter. All right, so that's another indication. In Acts, there's a big gap when there's no mention of Peter. There's the story in this 12th chapter of Acts where he was arrested and put in jail, put in prison, and this angel came to him and escorted him out of the prison. And then he doesn't show up again until the Jerusalem Council. So
He was a fugitive.
it
was hiding out.
That's true. That's true. All right, because it was all right. So then it's thought that Peter died in Rome while Nero's rule, that he was martyred in Rome in about 64.
Wasn't he the one who was hung upside down? He didn't want to be crucified like his.
Yeah, that's the tradition.
Oh.
Yeah, it doesn't
It's
say.
a nice story.
Yeah, it's a nice story.
Well, sort of
I know, all
nice
these
story.
traditions, like these traditions, and then we find out some of these things are
Are true.
right. You know, Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. So
Oh, jeez.
yeah. All right.
You're
So-
busting all my bubbles.
Sorry, sorry.
She was one of the first disciples.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think there were other women disciples too, Susanna and Joanna.
And rich.
Huh?
And wasn't she rich?
Who? Mary Magdalene? Possibly.
Yeah.
Susanna, I think, wasn't
Which
she
one was the one
referred
that
to?
sold the purple stuff?
I thought Lydia was the purple lady.
Oh, was she?
That was
Lydia is the
Paul.
purple lady.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we digress with trivia.
I'm sorry. I
Okay.
started it.
So we are now with the, this time frame when First and Second Peter are written. We're getting into the second and third generations of Christians. Okay. So, all right. So I'm just gonna wrap it up there because we're supposed to finish by 10:45 anyway. That was our plan. Good to see you. All right. So any final questions or anything?
I still will be, we are recording these sessions. I will be putting it up in the next few days, and then also I'll provide a link to the article that Kathy shared with
Oh.
Sarah and I that talks about the chronological and the conical and whatever order of the New Testament that she was speaking about earlier. I'll put that on a webpage for the class.
That'd be
Okay.
interesting. That'd be good.
All right. So it's been wonderful to be with y'all this morning. I still am kind of like, should I be sitting at my dining room table right now?
In my shorts.
Where's the cat?
Yeah,
Where's the
yeah.
cat? Yeah, we missed the, you'll have to get your dog up there, Stuart, and Claire, so we have some animals.
Yeah. Oh, good. All right.
Okay.
All right. All
It's
right.
it's amazing
You
to
just
me
put the
how
dog to sleep,
comfortable
Kathy.
this all is and how
Yeah.
it feels like you guys are right in the room with
It
us.
does.
So
I mean, you feel
Like,
like.
I miss the close-ups of you being on Zoom. You're
Ah.
distant figures.
Oh, well.
But it's still clear enough that we can see everybody easily, and it
Mhm,
really
mhm.
is, I just miss being there. I miss, the being in the church, and it's just, this is a step toward that. So thank
we'll
you.
have to send you some pheromones or something.
Yeah, we'll send you some, what was it, Kathy, that we wiped off the table?
Oh, the mildew.
The mildew. We'll send you some mildew in a letter so you
Yeah.
can smell the mildew.
Hey,
of the plant.
Sarah,
Which is now gone. thankfully.
would you text me the name of the book so I can order it?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. All right.
All right, we'll see you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.